All right, welcome into Texans on Tap. I am Josh Jordan. I am joined by Charlie Palillo. Follow us on X at Palillo and at Josh Jordan 975. Charlie, it was a close one. The Texans almost came away with a huge victory. Back and forth game, defense turnovers, just really great job by them, but struggling to protect CJ Stroud today seemed to be a really big issue. What are your thoughts on the offense and their inability to really get the pass game going today?
Boy, it was Joe Mixon or nothing pretty much for 4 quarters. The Texans don't even net 200 yards in total offense. The expansion Houston Texans, remember them? No offensive line, David Carr running for his life. They averaged 213 yards per game. The Texans finished this game with 197. Mixon, the bulk of that. CJ Stroud was harried the entire game, didn't throw the ball especially well. The rare opportunities he had to throw it. 86 yards passing for an NFL quarterback. Subtract the 31 yards lost in sacks, 4 sacks. That's a net of 55 yards in the passing game. With just those numbers, it's really a marvel the Texans were in this game and had the lead with 3 seconds to play. But the pass protection, I mean, credit to Green Bay, though, as we talked about in the preview. It's not as if the Packers have been a jailbreak, hell-raising pass rush squad. What Green Bay had been this season, a takeaway machine, 17 of them in 6 games. The Texans managed to play cleanly in terms of turnovers. The Packers, meanwhile, with 3. Jordan Love continues throwing at least 1 per game. But you know what? In the NFL, if you're a +3 in the giveaway takeaway, you win more than 90% of the time. The Texans find themselves in that minority in a tough loss, not a shameful loss, although the offensive output in the end was pretty shameful. First touchdown, obviously set up by a muff punt, an 11-yard drive after they could only get a field goal after the first opportunity, starting at the Green Bay 11-yard line, the Neville Hewitt interception early in the game. Even the one touchdown drive of any heft was started from their 45-yard line. And if not for Joe Mixon busting a 32-yard run along the way, they probably don't score a touchdown there. So the offense was largely overmatched in the game. The defense stout and with the takeaways. But as we talked about Thursday, if you could even play them even, you take your chances. To be +3 and lose the game, I'd have lost a chunk of money on that.
For sure. And guys, if you're just joining us, Brandon's on vacation. He'll be back next week. Speaking of touchdowns and lack thereof, I thought that touchdown drop by Tank Dell really early in the game, right after that turnover, that was huge because he catches that ball. We know the final score. They win the ball game right there. And going on, talking about Tank a little more, no catches for 0 yards. I mean, talk about missing Nico Collins today. Well, I mean, who knows if it would have mattered all that much if they couldn't protect CJ. It was nice it wasn't a blowout like the Vikings game. It was back and forth. But, I mean, that was just really hard to watch with the offense. With all the amount of money they've spent on the O-line, and it to not be able to protect Stroud, that was disappointing. Do you think that's just kind of a Green Bay matchup thing, or is this going to be an issue going forward, the pass protection?
I mean, the pass protection's been a consistent problem. It's not as if CJ Stroud's been sacked 5-6 times per game. But my goodness, even though he's not a quote unquote running quarterback, it's a damn good thing he's a mobile quarterback because he is flushed from the pocket way too often. And he's able to throw the ball on the run. To chase your point on Nico Collins, they miss him desperately in the passing game because the Texans have 0 wide receivers who meet the definition of when in doubt, throw it up and let him make a play. I mean, Stephon Diggs is a decent possession guy. But what do you average? 4.6 yards per reception. I think his final numbers were 5 for 23.
Yep.
You mentioned Tank Dell, the donut for him. Xavier Hutchinson with a secondary hero role with that catch that enabled the Texans to work a little clock, but they ultimately settled for a field goal there. The Robert Woodses and John Mechie's are irrelevant. Dalton Schultz, one early catch for a big gainer, then nothing the rest of the game from him. Without Nico Collins, without Joe Mixon, without the 2 of them there, the Texans simply cannot have a really good offense.
No, I'm with you. I'm seeing some complaints about the play calling, Bobby Slowick here in the comments section. What did you think of that last drive where they just kind of got stuffed with two runs there, and then they tried a little out route there to Tank, not even in the end zone, but he wasn't able to make the catch. What did you think about those three plays?
Whether the throw to Dell was a terrible play call or just a check down where Stroud's figured I better get rid of the ball. Look, you were in relative chip shot field goal range already for Fairbairn, so to throw a 10-yard out on 3rd and 15 was pretty pointless. Even though the Texans were turnover free, I don't know if it entered Slowick's mind that what if Green Bay sells out and you get a big loss sack or a strip sack, and there's where you cough up the ball for the first time. But the Packers defense just largely dominated the Texans O. So to question running the ball with Mixon, even though it was -2 and then -3, right? The concept was clear, make the Packers at least use some timeouts. But then that makes it even more ridiculous that you throw it on 3rd down, where even if it's caught, Dell's out of bounds, it stops the clock. It gives the Packers the one turnover to work with on their final drive. In the end, play calling, player performance, the absentia of Nico Collins, the Texans offense was just not good enough.
No, it wasn't. And it's funny there at the very end, Eric Murray, I think it was him that kind of had the ball go off his fingers on that final Packers drive. It would have been a miraculous, just incredible catch if he made it. So I don't really blame him for that. It was just an odd angle, but if you catch that, the Texans win the ball game there. What about the defense? What'd you see from the defense today? We saw Will Anderson with the sack, Daniel Hunter with the sack. Settle, I think, had one, and a lot of turnovers. A lot of good things to talk about from the defense today, right?
Yeah, the opportunistic and Jordan Love is both feast and famine. As we discussed in the preview, multiple 4-touchdown pass games. But in their loss to Minnesota, he threw 3 picks. He has thrown at least 1 interception in every game he's played this season, and he made it 5 for 5 with the 2 that he threw today. You know, he can be wild high. I mean, that was, a peak Randy Johnson, Roger Clemens fastball to Kraft for the touchdown, just beyond the reach of Kalen Bullock in the first half. But Josh Jacobs didn't really gash them at all in the run game. You know, it's not as if it's a terrible loss. I mean, the Texans were in the NFC North. It would be problematic. Destroyed at Minnesota. Now you lose at Green Bay. But this isn't a real bad blow in terms of tie breaks. And the two teams to which they've lost, right? Minnesota, unbeaten pending the outcome with Detroit today. The Packers are 5-2 and a good football team. I would say more opportunity lost than they blew it or anything like that. And the last drive of the game defensively, it's not as if the Texans played soft. Right? They knew a field goal and they lose the game. They mixed in a couple of blitzes. Love made a couple of solid throws. The new kickoff touchback rule, starting at the 30-yard line when Green Bay only needed to get it into field goal range. That was a pretty good head start with still, a minute 48 and a timeout with which to work. And in the end, Brandon McManus, who the Texans have seen for in the past, Jacksonville most recently. If not familiar with his backstory, right, Jim Nance tiptoed around it a little bit during the telecast. McManus faced charges for sexual harassment on a Jaguars flight to London last season. He'd signed with Washington as a free agent. When these charges hit, the Commanders released him immediately. The charges wound up dismissed. Just in the past week, the NFL cleared him to play. Green Bay's rookie kicker had been terrible. They signed McManus, his first field goal attempt in over 9 months. And obviously not extra point length, but he drilled it right down the pipe, really twice. Right? Once D'Amico tries to ice him. Instead, that was just a practice kick, and the second one was true. So at 5-2, the Texans are still well-positioned and a chance to de facto, I'd say, wrap up the AFC South next week if they can complete a sweep of the Colts to get to 6-2.
Yeah, a lot of little mistakes cost the Texans today in a game this close. I don't know if it was his responsibility. It looks like Dalton Schultz, though, to me, maybe missed a block that knocked the Texans out of field goal range. That could have been the difference in the game. Another big one was that when there was a possible fumble where the pass, maybe it was a backwards pass from the Packers, and then D'Amico decided ultimately not to challenge that call. And then I believe the very next play was that touchdown pass. What did you think of D'Amico's decision to not challenge there?
Yeah, obviously, since we get cranking pretty quickly after the game, we have not heard or did not hear D'Amico's explanation of that. Was there confusion? Looking at the couple of replays, I don't think they would have won a challenge on that. But if it disrupted your defensive flow and your play calling and your readiness for the next snap, but that was one of Love's really good throws up the sideline. And, there are a couple of guys in the Texans secondary, especially in the absence of Kamari Lassiter, that teams are going to go after, right? Anytime they can get a tight end or a back on Jalen Petrie, they're going to like taking their chances there. Stingley is a premium cornerback. Ross is not. So I don't think that swung the game or anything like that. But if you weren't as ready for the snap as you might have been, that's when you kind of kick yourself a little bit on.
Yeah, definitely. I didn't notice him today. Danico Autry he was scheduled to return. Did you notice him out there in today's game?
Just by looking for the number to make sure that he was in there in his first game eligible. Pretty quiet return, however, with Hunter and Anderson. I mean, we've seen Mario Edwards get a couple of sacks and Tim Settle get a couple of sacks. Danico did not crack the stat column, at least the first time out in the sack column. I don't know if he had a tackle or an assist along the way. It's all quiet on the Christian Harris front. I really think they could use one more athletic sideline to sideline linebacker, and you compound that with To'o out today. You had Jake Hansen take a terrible angle and just get run by on the one Jacobs long run. And boy, a yin and yang day for Neville Hewitt. Spears the interception to set up the Texans' first score. And then just a really stupid personal foul. Where's Brandon when you need him? I don't know what the wrestling move was for that. I know it wasn't quite a suplex.
Looked like, yeah,
that
that's close enough.
Stupid. Instead of 3rd and long, you gift them a first down at your 20-yard line. 3 plays later, Packers are in the end zone. And, that was a different kind of undiscipline. The Texans have not been a cheap shot, idiotic team this year. But going in, you lead the NFL in penalties. So whether it's the offensive line, which again today was clean on false starts and that sort of thing. But this team's just been way too penalized to think of itself as an all-around elite team at this point.
Yeah, no doubt about it there. Do you have any X factors? Anything else you want to highlight? Something that caught your attention from today's matchup?
I mean, the X factor spat in my face. The Packers, the number 1 takeaway team in the NFL, 17 in 6 games. They'd snared 3 turnovers in 5 of their 6 games and 2 in the other. If you told me the Texans would not give it up 1 time and take away 3 times, I'd be saying they're 6-1. Nevertheless, that's why stats can't always tell the story. Stat, though, that does tell a big part of this one. C.J. Stroud with 86 yards passing. Ew.
It was gross. And, listening to Tony Romo during the broadcast, he's like, Stroud he doesn't have time to do anything. He's getting flushed out of the pocket constantly. And he didn't really have anybody to throw to. Hutchinson with the 1 catch and Dalton Schultz. What do you have? 1 catch on the day? I mean, there was just not much going on. Only 2 catches for Joe Mixon. He was such a big part of the game. Maybe try and throw him the ball a little bit more. I mean, he's such a game breaker. What a difference this offense is with him. But, when your receivers aren't getting open, you need to be able to rely on your running backs and your tight ends. And those guys basically did nothing today. So it's a tough opponent. Texans are still in good shape. At least they didn't get blown out like we talked about earlier. So, I was disappointed, but at least it was an exciting game. But, in the end, it kind of felt like the Packers were out playing the Texans. I was kind of surprised it actually ended up being as close as it was.
Agreed. And to beat the dead horse on this, if you're +3 in the turnover battle and you lose the game, the other team was better, right? If you couldn't take more advantage of winning the turnover battle, especially on the road, to have that +3. And just to further on the offense, I've been pretty consistent in saying, hey, you need at least to take a shot deep downfield once per half with Tank Dell. This was a game where you couldn't do that even if that was in the game plan, because the Packers were putting too much pressure on Stroud. And the Texans do not have a receiver without Nico Collins who can go win the 50-50 ball, who can out-physical even good cornerbacks, right? Dell's the little tiny speed guy. Diggs is the savvy route running, but slower of foot now, veteran. And then the other guys are fill-ins. So one moral of the story, boy, Nico needs to get right and stay right the rest of the year, as Joe Mixon certainly is right and needs to stay right the rest of the year.
Yeah, I also noticed Romeo Dobbs was consistently winning out there today. It didn't really seem to matter which cornerback he was on. They moved him a lot. That was something we talked about in the preview, is that they line him up a lot on the right side, but they kept moving him to the left to get him away from Stingley, and that paid some big dividends for them today. Christian Watson didn't kill you with the deep ball. I thought that might have been one of my X factors this week, but not the case. Josh Jacobs did just enough, and he scores his first receiving touchdown, so that was big for him. But either way, it was a close game. I'm happy for my Texans. I wish they would have come away with the dub. That would have been huge, going to Green Bay and winning that. That just didn't quite pull it off. And kind of a tale of two halves, right? The first half, I felt a little better. And then we come out in the second half, and neither team could really hardly move the ball in the second half.
76 yards of offense, all the Texans could generate in the second half. And let's just sneak in a little bit of highbrow, Josh, to prove that we can. Romeo, oh Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Open in the middle of the field too often against the Texans defense in this one. Now, this team is good enough and accomplished enough that, forget moral victories of, hey, hanging close at Green Bay. Everyone enjoys some ice cream and pizza after the game. But other than the offensive line looking all too porous in pass protection, I don't think there's anything overarchingly concerning that the Texans are an absolute fraud or something like that. Their two losses are to two very good, bona fide NFC contenders.
Yeah, and we mentioned how banged up they were. Azeez Al-Shire not being in this game, I think was critical. And I also think Jimmy Ward, they gave him an extension, another year on his contract, and he missed a lot of time last year. And here he is again, just an older player that's just not able to suit up. So I kind of scratched my head when they extended his contract, and then here he is hurt again and not being able to make an impact. Well, looking ahead, they got the Colts. That game's at home for the Texans. So if they bounce back against Indy, you got to like their chances moving forward. Any final thoughts here, Charlie, before we log off?
Well, I guess in defeat, if we're going player of the game, it has to be Joe Mixon. A couple of games back where he has just been stellar, over 100 yards on the ground. And I just love how hard he runs. Showed a little burst today, but I mean, he's just not one of the more explosive backs in the league, but he is always falling forward unless he's being tackled as he's getting the ball, like on the last couple of snaps offensively for the Texans. He's just been an absolute horse when he's been able to come out of the starting gate.
Yeah, I'm like, what were the Bengals thinking? I guess they just wanted to shed some salary because he's been terrific. Now, he has missed some time, but that was kind of a fluky injury there on that hip drop tackle to his ankle. I guess my player of the game, I'm going to go with Kalen Bullock. I'm really impressed with what I'm seeing from him as a rookie and his ability that was an incredible catch he made on that interception, able to high point the ball. So it looks like the Texans might have nailed that pick. He's looking good so far. All right, guys, that is it for us. We will be back next week. And of course, we'll be doing a Texans preview on Thursday, getting you ready for that game against Indy. If you're also an Astros fan, the three of us do a podcast covering the Astros called Stone Cold Stros. We're going to drop an episode on Monday, so be sure to check that out. And that's it for us today. For Charlie, for myself, go Texans.